since it's by my clock 1 after 12, so I don't want to wait too much longer. People will be joining, I'm sure, as we go. But again, Chuck Dunlap from the Indiana Bar Foundation, thank you all for joining our third virtual conference for the Civic Education Task Force. I just wanted to let you know, unfortunately, and I'll be turning it over to a representative from the Lieutenant Governor's office, but she had something come up at the last minute and won't be able to join us. I guess global pandemics will do that for you if you're an elected official these days. So, but we will, and I think hopefully everybody got the materials ahead of time, and we have two general agenda items. The first is to review the data that we had from our sort of civic education survey. And I want to thank all of you who were on that committee and helped put that together. I think we got a lot of really good participation, and we'll be walking through some of that information with you. Again, the materials, you have the materials, so we'll be walking through some of that. Tim Colgreen from our office, who is on the meeting, will be working through that. And my hope is that that'll take about 25 to 30 minutes. And then the rest of the time we can focus on the draft recommendations. I want to also thank the members of the policy committee. Many of you are on the call, and as we go through that portion, I'm going to sort of help walk us through it. But for those folks that are on the policy committee, please feel free to chime in and to add your thoughts and comments. During that process, I'm going to be pausing periodically to get input from folks. Feel free to put it in the chat as well. And if you'd like to say something, feel free to put something in the chat and indicate that. Joseph is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that way, welcome to put those in. And as we pause, we'll recite those and address them. And then if you'd like to say something or have some input, we'll do it that way as well. We'll pause and you can unmute and put your questions in there. And again, the recommendations, I think I mentioned before, but they've come from our Hoosier experts, many of which are on the task force, national experts, some of which we've heard from the past meetings. The survey results help to inform them as well, and also members of the policy committee. So thank you again for that. Let me turn it over to John Roeder, and he's going to address you briefly on behalf of the Lieutenant Governor.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
All right. Hey, so I just wanted to really quickly say the Lieutenant Governor regrets that she can't join us today, but did want me to express her sincere appreciation for all the work that this task force is doing. She's really excited about it and impressed with everything so far. So keep up the good work, and she'll be able to join us hopefully next time. Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it, and thank you for all of your work in helping to continue this effort. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tim, and Tim will share his screen and we'll follow along with some of the data points. There's a lot of information. Again, some of it is fairly self-explanatory and we can get through fairly quickly. But again, if you have questions, feel free, as we're in this first phase, feel free to put them in the chat, and Tim will be pausing periodically as well to address those. So with no further ado, over to you, Tim.
All right. Can everybody hear me and see the PowerPoint? Getting a few nods here. So we're going to go ahead with that. Like Chuck said, this is going to be kind of the presentation of the survey information that we got, that we collected this spring and summer. As he mentioned, this was used to be a way to inform the recommendations that this task force is looking to present as well. Quick background information is we had the survey open for a month. Over 500 responses came in. Just of note, the complete responses obviously are a little lower. Since we aren't using this as formal research and pieces that way, we're not totally worried about respondents not finishing all the questions. We're still running with the assumption that when they did complete any question that they did complete, their responses are valid for our purposes here. So what I'm going to do is we've divided this up into a couple sections, I think maybe 4 or 5 sections. If you don't mind, I'm going to try to go through the section and then make the pauses for questions, comments at that point. But hopefully you had a chance to review this when it was sent out last week, but we can go over anything you have the questions for as well. When we look at who actually responded to the survey, we asked what type of school they are a part of. The vast majority obviously come from public school employees, a large 86% of the respondents, which I think goes well with what we're looking for here. Obviously, we do have private and charter schools that got represented in the survey. We also asked them what kind of community they teach in. And so the highest percentage comes from rural schools. It's still a relatively even distribution of the rural, suburban, and urban teachers that are responding as well. So it's good to see that we do have a good blend of all of the education pieces and educators from around the state. We also wanted to know how long they've been in education. I think some of the big highlight here is that 90% of the respondents have over 5 years of experience or 5 or more years of experience, and 75% or so have 10 or more years of experience. I think what we take from that is the survey has an overwhelming amount of experience to listen to. And so it can really help, we can use this to help inform as we go forward. The respondents also looked at what role or job title that they have. And of the respondents, 70% are classroom teachers, giving us the voice of what's going on in the trenches, in the classroom day after day. And again, these stats should give us confidence in using this data. Any questions at this point about the, who has completed the survey?
None in the chat right now, Tim. You're good.
Next section we wanted to look at was kind of the curriculum and standards that they were teaching when we look at civic education across the state. Asking the question, does your class or district include teaching about current issues and current events? As you can see, many are using the current events in the classroom. Teaching current events and current issues is one part of mastering the 6 proven practices of the civic mission of schools. So it's great to see that so many are doing that. And when we break it down a little bit further, we can see that the teaching of controversial issues is the other side of the coin of teaching the current events. We're able to differentiate a bit between teaching current events, teaching controversial issues, and teaching issues of injustice. And these latter 2 topics are discussions held a lot less frequently and possibly not as prioritized as the other one. We can take that as a way to a need to empower our teachers to be able to discuss controversial issues and issues of injustice, noting that they're real world events and issues that we need to educate our students. It also leads to the idea that teachers would probably want professional development and training on how to do this better. With the chart that you can see showcasing how the different breakdown of current events, controversial issues, and injustices are being taught. We asked them too about civic education simulations as part of their curriculum. Running simulations is another piece of the civic mission of schools. And so in looking to Hoosier teachers, if they're doing this, we do see that a good chunk are, and almost 60% are in some way integrating simulations into their curriculum. But it does leave a pretty big void as to those that are not or don't know. So it's definitely room for improvement in that piece there. So we did follow up and ask which kind of simulations do you use in your classroom? There is many ways. Some that we offered, obviously giving the open-ended other as well, that there are a wide variety of programs that can be used. But it's also a recognition that a lot of them are underutilized around the state as well. And then just of note, simulating mock elections, mock trial, and mock legislative hearings and We the People tend to be the top three that you see. But obviously, like I said, there's a wide variety of programs that are in use around the state. Branching out of the classroom, we asked if civics are incorporated through co or extracurricular activities as well. And so with this response, only about a third have responded that they are incorporating co and extracurricular civic programming. It breaks down to about a third are no and a third don't know, but at least highlighting that point that really actively only a third of the respondents are doing it. And again, of those, breaking it down a little bit more is what are they doing? Again, it's a wide variety of ways that teachers are incorporating civics into their co and extracurricular activities, but the realization of the underutilization of the programs that are already in existence statewide. Again, multiple options there, just highlighting 4-H, Boys and Girls State, and voter registrations are the top three that are being seen so far. But like I said, again, an underutilization of different things, different programs that can be employed statewide. We asked about the percentage of students that are involved in any of these activities. And so this, I'm not so much the stats person and how to read this, but this is what we gather from this is that on average, 30% of a school's population participates in a civic education program. But as you look at the table, the median is 24, meaning most answers were lower than the average, and it has a relatively high standard deviation. Means that the responses were spread out along the spectrum. But as you can see, the graph, the responses are more concentrated at that lower end. So the graph shows the frequency of the data value sorted into a bracket of 10. So the group of 10, 0 to 10, 11 to 20, and 21 to 30 are by far the highest frequency of responses. The average is brought up by virtue of respondents that indicated that 100% of their students participate in the program, which we find a little suspect a little bit, but it's at least how we got the information. So the chart shows why the standard deviation is so high, because the average is low, but responses are varied widely. Basically, what the takeaway that we want to take from this is there's a small percentage of students per class typically that participate in the activities already in the school. The other piece about what we asked about is service learning, and if service learning was required in a class. Service learning is another way to integrate civics both in and out of the class, and in the last decade or so especially, it's seen an increase in the number of schools that are requiring some sort of service learning. Currently, as you can see, only about 27% do, and nearly 60% don't have that active requirement. So there's definitely room for an improvement there as a way to increase civics in the classroom. And then as a requirement for graduation, again, more than twice as many respondents said that there is not such a requirement to those that do, but again, the yeses are a small minority of those. So that's this section of kind of the curriculum piece in there. So I'll pause at this point to see if there are any questions. I know I've had a few flashes on my screen, so I think there's stuff in the chat box.
Yeah, so the first one we can start with is, do we know if we have geographic spread around the state? And I can answer that by pulling up the data that we didn't share because it was mentioned to be confidential and just related to the gift card distribution. But the most popular responses for the city that the teacher or administrator came from are Syracuse, Bloomington, Fishers, Elkhart, Nashville, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, Terre Haute, Evansville, Muncie, South Bend, Carmel, and Westfield, and then many other lesser chosen answers. And then for you, Tim, what is legislators back to school?
That is I'll look to see if somebody else can kind of help build in on this, but my understanding, and again, being a newish Hoosier, but my understanding is there's some sort of connection between schools and legislators, especially near the beginning of the year, that helps bring a legislator into the classroom to talk about legislative process.
There may be others on the call who have participated in it. I'm not sure if it's a formally organized thing or if it's just an individual thing that legislators end up doing.
But we'll see if we can get more specific on that too, but that's at least my understanding of what it was there.
Okay, and then just a comment finally that charter or private might require some activity from everyone. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but Elizabeth Osborne, if you'd like to elaborate on that, feel free.
I just was replying to Tim's comment that might be suspect to have a school with 100%, but if a school, a really small school, was a respondent and they have a requirement, it might skew our results, but it would be accurate for that, small school.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. The other thing that we thought about too is, as you're answering the question from your own personal point of view as well, you might have that requirement for your class, which means from your point of view, 100% have to do this, and it is a requirement. So it at least gives us some indication. I think, like I said, it's not a true research study, but we've gotten the sense impression of what's going on around the state with that. But definitely point taken with that too. Anything else at this point? All right. The next section that we want to look at, we focused a few questions on specifically elementary civic education. And so just to pull those out for a quick second, we asked the elementary teachers, how frequently is civics taught in your classroom? The takeaway that we're seeing from this is over 2/3 of the respondent said they teach civics twice a month or less. So it's not something that is taught very often. Although we do have 4 respondents that said they teach civics daily at the elementary level. Obviously the vast majority, like I said, about 2/3 of the respondents teach it less than twice a month. And when you break it down as to the time that they spend, when they do teach it, a majority of people, of the respondents, spend less than 20 minutes a day on it. So you're looking at about 56%. Like I said, a majority spend less than 20 minutes on average, less than twice a month. So we do interpret this that there's just a lack of civics being taught at the elementary level, and hopefully that can improve to carry a love of civics later in life. Any questions about, that's all I have about the elementary. Any questions at this point? Okay.
You can continue.
Next section, the next section that we asked about is teacher enthusiasm and the professional development that they get about civics. So there's a lot of information on this slide, and I get that there's the chart and the table and everything. Just a few things that I did want to highlight on here is teachers feel supported by their administrators to go through PD. 77% agree or strongly agree that their administrators are supportive of that. However, they don't feel there are financial resources to support this. 40% disagree or strongly disagree that there's enough funding, as opposed to 30% that agree with it. Teachers overall have indicated that they agree more with the proposition that most of their PD comes from peer interaction, and the formal opportunities seem to be either limited or not widely utilized. So considering how most of the teachers responded that they have 10 or more years of experience, that this could be the basis of a creation or invigoration of a community of practice. One of the things we will see later on in the recommendations. And teachers feeling the overwhelming sentiment that there is a desire and a support from their administration for the professional development, yet as mentioned, they don't feel there's the funding necessary to be able to seek out these activities with that. So we asked what their school or school district has offered them when it comes to civic education training. As you can see, more than 2/3 of respondents said that their school does not offer civic education workshops, and less than 10% said yes. So again, it feels there's a vacuum of civic education training in Indiana. It's a lack of easy access to professional development opportunities provided by the school. And as we go through this data, we see a desire that for more PD is wanted from the teachers. So we asked what kind of participation in the professional development did they participate in? The data indicates that teachers are doing their own thing for PD and completing online or self-paced courses. We do see that about 55% are getting to go outside their districts for PD on teaching methodology and strategy, but only 28% go outside their district for PD on their content and civics. There's a large opportunity as well to increase coaching and mentoring from peers as we build a community of practice, and a big opportunity for professional development providers, especially in these times, to be proctored online, get a great response considering the online self-paced program more likely to be attended and completed as well. So some methods that we can take away from here. We asked we asked the teachers about their interest level in teaching civics. As you can, this is great. The teachers are very interested in teaching civics. It's something that they like to do. 83% are very or some interested in teaching content. So the takeaway is it's not like teachers don't want to teach this. This is something that they enjoy and have an interest in. However, the numbers drop to 72% that are comfortable or very comfortable in teaching it. Flip side means that there's over 1/4 of respondents that just don't have a comfort or don't feel comfortable with teaching it. So it's a look and seeing at how do we support these teachers, and proper professional development resources, opportunities are afforded to these teachers could have an instant impact in helping them feel more comfortable with the content. That's the last slide of this section. Any questions at this point?
We have a question comment from Dr. Osborne that I wonder what the response might have been if we asked about access to social studies content, PD in general, then drilled down to civics. My impression is that very little social studies content in general. Would like to hear what others think.
Yeah, good point. Any thoughts from the group? But in kind of response to you, Dr. Osborne, I agree that social studies professional development is a bigger pool to look at, and the civics does have a little bit more of a niche piece in there, but it's at least what we're looking at and what we asked about for this survey.
And we have a question from Dr. Watson. Asking, was there one thing for the context they did not feel comfortable with?
I will let me get to a couple slides down the road here, because we did ask a question about what topics they feel, I don't remember how we worded it, confident or less confident in teaching, or what civics content. So let's see if I can get to a couple slides down the road and see if I answer that, and if not, we can revisit your question. The next section that we were looking at is just asking some of the opinions of the teachers about different pieces. So we asked them if they think that their school or their district are meeting its civic mission to create informed, active, and engaged citizens. I think it's overall positive here that 60% agree or strongly agree, but arguably this should be much higher considered what's considering what is laid out in the civic mission of schools. As noted, that all American children need to have the civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions necessary to participate in, preserve, and strengthen our republic. It can only be achieved if all the groups embrace the civic mission of schools and work together to promote high-quality civic learning. So it's a relatively high number there, but it's like noted that I think it can go higher pretty easily as well to help make sure our students are informed, engaged, and active. We asked the teachers, how much time does the school or your district devote to civic education? The majority of respondents think civics is taught too little in school, and only 2 respondents thought it was taught too much. It's interesting to think then too that educators believe that civic education does not currently get the attention it deserves. And it forms the question of how would these responses change if the topic was STEM education? How much time does your school or district devote to STEM education? It just would have been an interesting comparison that we didn't ask, but it's a question that gets raised at that point too. This I know is a big chart and table here, asking about levels of agreement with statements. So just a few highlighted points in there too. We ask if civic education is a priority for the district. When you break it down, the plurality becomes that they're neutral in it, but more agree than disagree with the statement. We ask if they're able to sufficiently focus on civics without the pressure of other subjects being taught and tested. The plurality disagrees with that. They find that the other subjects tend to put more pressure. They're looking at that as well. And asking the question, do I have the resources to teach civics? Again, the plurality disagrees with that, more teachers think that they could use more resources. And then we ask if you have all the training you need to teach civics. The plurality agrees with that statement, which is interesting because it seems to contradict a few other questions that were asked. So, but it's at least another indicator that there's a lot of information and still pieces to get out of there. Dr. Watson, this might answer your question there too. We did ask, what are the top 3 civic topics you think that are most challenging to teach? These top topics especially are amorphous concepts, but they're concepts embedded into the American culture and psyche and government, especially when you look at diversity, fairness, authority, federalism, hard topics to actually work at. And so these topics need more dedicated, fleshed out foundations, curriculum, and more PD to help teachers teach them. But you can get an idea, like I said, hopefully answering your question from before of what do they not feel comfortable with. And so these are how they answered the topics that are challenging to teach. That's the end of this section. Is there any other questions at this point?
Not right now. So you're good to move on.
Okay. So again, as noted at the very beginning, a lot of these, plus the feedback from the policy committee, helped inform the recommendations that we are looking to propose to you on behalf of the task force. So with that and the description and talking through of the policy recommendations, I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck for that.
Thanks, Tim. And again, feel free as we move along, I'll do likewise and pause periodically so we can discuss these as we go. Just some general things about how we structured this section of the presentation. And again, thanks to the policy committee for their work in helping us put this together. The general recommendations we decided to divide up into 2 phases, mostly based on time. Some of them, like for example, standards revisions and things like that, have a set specific time frame incorporated with it. So we accepted that and sort of used those to create these two phases, the phase 1 being 2021 through 2024, and phase 2 recommendations being from 2024 to 2026. So those are the general breakdowns that we had, two categories for the recommendation prioritization. We also had general areas for the recommendations that you'll see that we broke them out into. And what we did in the third column, when we get into them, there's a section with various levels of implementation. So if you have a recommendation and you want to implement it, there's different ways to do it. Is it a mandate? Is it a recommendation? Is it an incentive? There's a lot of different ways and metrics. So we tried to put some range of options into there as well, that I like this recommendation, but I don't know how much we want to do or how aggressive we want to be about it. Those are some options that we have there as well. So when we're looking through the chart, we'll spend a little bit of time on those things. And we also tried to, we've gone over the data, but we tried to incorporate where it was relevant, some of the data points, and we broke them down a little bit more depending on what it was. So for example, by teaching level, elementary, middle, or high, etc. So you'll see some of the recommendation portion has some of the other data points along with it. So with that, let's go to the first set of recommendations. And these, we didn't have any data points along with them other than what we've already seen. But this general topic of civic certifications and credentials is how we titled it. And we have two recommendations, and they're really coming from some of the things we've heard nationally. This first one, establish a democracy school program similar to that found in other states and modeled after the Indiana STEM certification program to encourage a holistic approach and implementation in civic or an improvement in civic education. So the idea there, and again, Dr. Healy from Illinois, and there are many other examples of a democracy school, but we're fortunate to have a STEM certification program in Indiana that we might be able to use as a model. So that was the thinking behind this particular recommendation generally. It also, you can use, again, rubrics, other standards and things that are established in other schools as a template, or other states, excuse me, as a template. And also this is an area that I think that we might be able to have additional public-private partnership involved from a funding perspective as well as potentially administration. And it's an area I think that the Indiana Bar Foundation feels that we might be able to play a role in some of that. And again, the adapted or modeled after the STEM certification program, and have an Indiana Democracy Certified or some other title along with that particular demarcation. And then various levels, mostly based on how soon and how many schools, as far as a volume, how quickly you do it. For what it's worth, I believe Illinois' Democracy School program, their budget is about $200,000 a year. And I can't remember the exact numbers of schools, but we've had communications with them and other states. So it doesn't have to be a huge financial burden. And again, there might be a role for public and private support. I'm just going to go ahead and do the second one also, and then I'll pause and we can discuss both of these. The second one is a similar and could in fact be embedded into the first one in some way. But that is establish a recognition program to recognize teachers, students, administrators, and schools for showing exemplary outcomes in civic learning. So that could take a lot of different forms, certificates, completion awards, various endorsements on either teacher licenses, diplomas, also for students, school districts recognized for successfully incorporating some of these things. If they're members, if they're participating in a democracy school program, some of this can be embedded there as well. The other thing too that I think this could be established is, there are other statewide recognition programs for students in sports and athletes, as well as other STEM programs. So, the possibility of having a civic student of the year or something along those lines with a whole process around that could be something that's implemented in this particular area as well, to bring civics and participation in civics programs to the forefront from a statewide perspective. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any comments from either any members of the policy committee who want to add to that, or any questions from anybody else, either in the chat or if you'd like to unmute and do that as well, that's fine. Okay. Not seeing any. Joseph, doesn't look like there's any on the chat, so I will proceed to the next one. So professional development. This is one recommendation, but it's a significant one, and it has a lot of different facets to it. I'm going to go through this, and then we have some supporting slides with data afterwards, which I'll go through, and then I'll pause for comments, feedback, etc. So the first part of this, as some of the data indicated, was, I think, based on what we've seen, there is a strong desire for teachers and administrators and others to increase the professional development opportunities from whatever source and whatever method. And so the recommendation as it's currently crafted is the Department of Education as well as public-private partners. So it's not just the Department of Education in the state, it's other organizations, certainly the Bar Foundation, and we do some of this, but the Supreme Court does a really good job, and Chief Justice Rush and former Chief Justice Shepard, who started a lot of those work, and Dr. Osborne. A lot of people on this in this meeting are really involved with that from the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. So it can be a lot of different partners. And the school district should provide more quality opportunities and resources for teachers to seek professional development in civics. There seems to be a strong desire from people to learn more and to be better able to teach these topics within their classroom. One thing I will note too, and when we get, I think, some of the data, you'll see the difference between elementary and middle and high school in this particular area, I think, is fairly significant, because elementary school teachers have to do it all. If you're a middle school teacher or you're a high school teacher, you can be more specialized in civics, and so that's the context of your teaching world, is that particular class. So for elementary teachers, I think it's a little more challenging because they have so many other competing things within what they do as a whole. The other part of this recommendation, and I won't read the rest of the entire slide, you can do that on your own, but the idea of there's only so many hours in the day. Are there opportunities to infuse civics in other cross-curricular types of programs and opportunities, in language arts, in other types of classes? And if there are, which I think most people think that there are, what sort of professional development opportunities can we enhance and to bring forward to help those sort of non-specialists in civics integrate what they're already doing with some of the civic education components that they might be able to bring to bear? So I think in the professional development field, that's a very important process, or an important thing to consider. And the other, as Tim mentioned earlier, I think some silver lining to our current pandemic situation, and the fact that technology has somewhat reduced some of these barriers to get professional development. And again, I'm speaking from our experience at the Bar Foundation. We have a summer institute that we provide to teachers every year, and typically it's been in Bloomington in residence, and we've had a great time with that, but it's a little bit limited. You have to get there, and there's a lot of other things that you have to do as a teacher to be able to make that happen. We were able to offer for the first time an online professional development summer institute that was, I think, very successful, and we got a lot of faces we hadn't seen before, and some new folks from around the state. So in the professional development area, and especially the context for how people want to get their professional development, I think taking advantage of the technology is something that at least we have the opportunity to do. And so that might be a helpful thing in this. Tim, let's just go ahead and we'll click through the data points briefly, and then we'll go back and I'll pause and we'll talk about professional development. So just in general, what is your interest level in teaching civics? You've seen some of this before, but breaking down between the three levels, you can see elementary is a little less interested in the context of they have so many other things to do. They're not specialized in that particular field like middle school and high school teachers generally are who are teaching civics. Next slide. So again, indicate your level of agreement with the following statements. Some of these you've seen, so I won't belabor it much more, but the idea of having the opportunity to develop relevant skills in teaching civics from formal training versus informal exchanges and colleagues, things like that. There are opportunities, but you can see again the elementary bar is shifted much more sort of to the yellow and to the right, which is neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. I think again because they have multiple topics that they're teaching. Next slide. And again, a couple more along the same vein. My administration is very supportive. Fortunately, I think that's a real a strong benefit that we have, is the administrations around the state seem to be very supportive of professional development. The next one's a little more challenging, and it's just reiterating what we've heard. Funding is important, and it's the most challenging, and so it's challenging for financial resources to be provided by school districts in general, but specifically for some of the professional development. So I think, again, the public-private partnership aspect can be an important vehicle to help deliver some of that professional development that's really needed. Next slide. Again, civic education is a priority for my school district. You can see there, and the training, I think, indicates that more training is sought by a lot of the teachers. Is there one more data slide, Tim? Okay. Resources that I need. Again, a lot of the respondents, and again, it's kind of tiered elementary, middle, and high school teachers are progressively neutral to disagree the lower levels you go as far as elementary versus high school. And again, I think a lot of that is the amount of time they're able to spend on it and the specific focus. And then you can really see that on this second slide with elementary. I think that's where the teachers felt strongly or more strongly that their teaching of civics was being crowded out by so many other topics because they have to do them all in a limited time, as opposed to middle and high school teachers who have a specific class period that they can teach it. Now that doesn't mean, you know, one class period of civics versus 5, 6, 7, 8 of, you know, of a different topic, but that's really not what we were, you know, asking with this particular question. And I think, okay, one more, last one. Thank you. Has your school district offered any in-service workshops on civic education? And again, Dr. Osborne, to your point, we didn't ask about social studies per se. We asked about specifically civic education, which is a subset of a lot of what the social studies teachers teach, obviously. So you can see it was not an overwhelming yes at any level. And it was rarely, I guess, was it a specific in-service workshop on civic education offered by the school district. So the idea that going out to get it from another source might be something that we might be able to do and bring to bear with some of this in order to address that. So I think that's the last of the data. Tim, if you want to go back to the recommendation slide, let me pause there and see if folks have any questions, comments, or if anybody from the policy committee wants to weigh in on this particular recommendation.
May I ask the question? This is
please. Please.
So one question I have is really it was context in addition to content, and so how do the recommendations correlate to some of the items that I think people felt most uncomfortable with, and where I'm getting at with this is I think there are some mindsets regarding social studies, civics education. But I think also a precursor of that will be a lot of people just don't feel comfortable talking about some of those items that you have there. And so, you know, the basic of a civil society is being able to communicate. And I love the fact that you have informal skills as well as, you know, technical skills included here. And so for me, that would be a major place to really dive into with, you know, how many feel comfortable really talking and expressing themselves, and can they do that when the conversation get difficult amongst the top things. And so that was my question with context, because different schools are in different places, and so do they know how to maneuver and stay out of trouble, but at the same time teach what needs to be taught?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words, and if anybody else, feel free to indicate, and we can have you join in. But I think that's an excellent point. The professional development, you know, sort of the recommendation is a broad one, but to your point, the specific areas that I think teachers want to have help with teaching is identified in one of those previous slides. And again, I don't want to make this a whole Bar Foundation thing, but it's what I know and what we know best, because that's where we are. But we've used that data already to inform some of our professional development that we're doing. And I think that taken together, so for example, we're going to be offering an online professional development in, Tim, what's the official title?
Looking at teaching about race, racism, and equal protection issues.
So that's the topic that we focused on because of the results primarily, and certainly there's a lot of things happening around that I think teachers want to have help figuring out how the best way to do that and to teach that is. And so that's one of the things, responding to the market, if you will. If that's what teachers want to know, we want to be able to provide that for them. And I think combined with better professional and more professional development in general, I think your point is a good one, is what you're teaching. And is it something that the population, your market, essentially wants to hear and wants to learn more about? So I think those will be at least informing our work, and we hope to be able to share these for others to inform their work as well. Let me see, is there anybody else who wanted to comment on that particular issue?
The only thing I'll add is just professional development being more widely looked at, in almost two threads: the content as well as the methodology and pedagogy that comes from it. And so I don't think you can leave one out. They both are important and they both need to be intertwined. And we need to make sure that as we look forward, teachers feel supported, that A, they know the content and can feel that they can speak to it authoritatively, but B, they also have strategies and methods to be able to do that, to your point, in the context. Absolutely, it's going to be very, very awkward if you don't have that background to talk the current controversial issues that are going on in today, let alone the standard ongoing controversial issues. So both content and teaching strategies, I think, are pivotal in the professional development that you're looking at.
Anybody else? Joseph, anything in the chat?
Nothing right now.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead, and again, if we cover something and you want to come back to it, feel free to put something in the chat, and we're happy to do that. So the next general group of topics and recommendations that we have, as you can see, entitled Strengthen Community and School Interaction. One of the things that I think came up multiple times is, civics and understanding it in sort of isolation within the academic or within the school setting is one thing, but also seeing it in reality. And I know efforts in the legislature and other places to try to infuse real world interactions and externships, those sorts of things, to see what communities look like and work through this in the real world. So these are sort of general ideas that come from that perspective. The first being invigorate and expand the communities of practice around civic education. And I think some of the information we got showed that teachers want to be able to have peer groups and peer networks and feel like that they can share and learn from. And again, this generally often is broader, the social studies context. And Dr. Osborne, I think you're still president of the Indiana Council for Social Studies. So certainly there's a role for that organization. And then at the national level, social studies as well. But also the civic subset of that, and the conference that is put on, and other things that also are professional development, but to really build that community. And I think there can be more work and hopefully things done in that area that expands in this particular area. And the other thing too, again, this is in levels of implementation, one possible way to help with that too is to increase the level of support from the Department of Education, specifically around civics. I know that's a budget issue primarily, and so that's always a challenge, but the idea of content experts at the Department of Education in civics, I think, could be an important role in that particular recommendation as well. Let me go to the second one here, and then I will pause. Actually, is this 2 slides, Tim?
Yeah, the school
Okay.
interactions.
Yeah, let me go through all of them, and then I'll pause. So we'll do the next one. Create opportunities for education and community partnerships. So this is really focused on the idea, again, of embedding the community with the schools and working with public and private organizations to see how they can improve civic learning opportunities for all students. So one of the examples, facilitate collaboration between education communities and nonprofits, agencies, businesses, etc. Mr. Brenniger, who's on the task force, couldn't be here today, but things like the Chamber of Commerce. We already talked about the Supreme Court and the judicial system and their outreach to really help provide real world opportunities to educate people about the state court system and the judicial branch in general. But also Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. They have a youth in philanthropy outreach program. So things are happening already, and that's great. I think this goes to trying to increase that and make more opportunities available for that connection between community partnerships and schools. And if there's a way that we can help, maybe not formalize, but help take some of those barriers away and incentivize organizations to reach out and to integrate with schools, that's sort of what this recommendation is designed to approach. Next slide, and then we'll do, I think, yeah, these two, and then I'll pause. So, and there are no specific data points in addition that we haven't already looked at for these four. The next one, within the strengthening community, ensure that policies and practices related to school administration and culture reflect democratic ideals. So this is the idea of students experiencing democratic practices throughout the school day embedded within the actual school, and providing adequate resources and training for districts and school officials to do that in a healthy and productive way, and inclusive way. And I don't want to put Representative Cook on the spot, but I will, because he had some real world experiences with that when we were talking about this at the policy committee. So I don't know, Representative Cook, if you're willing to share that with the group, but I thought it was very effective given your real world experience in how this can work. Maybe I'll pause and see if he can join on that later. And I'll go to the fourth one, and that's prioritize youth engagement in the democratic process. So the idea is not just, modern democratic processes such as voting and the electoral process, but also, are there ways to have actual student and youth representation on, so for example, a board of trustees or a school board, things like that. So you have that student voice, they can understand and see things happening, and you also get that perspective in the process, which again can be very helpful, and incorporate the youth voice, whether they have a full vote or some other way in order to have that voice. So that's the fourth recommendation, is to do that. So let me pause there and see if there are any thoughts on all four of those recommendations.
From Dr. Osborne, there's just a comment related to something you were talking about a moment ago, and she said that their conference will be online this year, and the theme is developing global citizens. Excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Osborne.
Professional development.
And yeah, that's, again, another benefit. If you want to participate, it's a click away for a lot of these things. So take advantage of some of those opportunities as they present themselves, I suppose, although I suspect many of us are zoomed out anyway, but to the extent you can have another Zoom meeting, it's easy to do. Okay. Anything else from anybody?
Can I say something real quick?
Please.
I was just thinking about the idea of action civics, or the model of civics that puts youth concerns at the center, and not just modern democratic processes, but the concerns that are applicable and chosen by youth themselves.
Right, and I think we've seen certainly youth engaging on a lot of things, and they have a voice and a perspective. So I think to the extent you can, facilitate that in a constructive way, that's certainly one of the areas that we're looking at. Anybody else?
Thanks.
Oh, sure. Okay. Next, and I think, is this the last one of phase one, Tim?
Correct.
Okay. So I'll take another pause after this, but the other thing in the sort of phase one recommendations, the last one that we have on the list is to create a civic education advisory coalition, which sounds very much like a civic education task force, of which you are currently serving, many of you. So we'll explain the difference. One of them is generally that this is a time limited entity, which hopefully is going to come up with some great recommendations, which we're going through now. And this recommendation goes to the point that we really need some ongoing, sustained group of folks who care about civic education, who want to continue this effort and, frankly, help promote the recommendations that are going to come from the task force. So if we created such a group, four names, Civic Education Advisory Coalition, of people that are interested in this. And I will tell you, when we launched this task force, we had any number of people who were very interested in the topic, who identified themselves and wanted to be part of this work. And so I think having a place for everybody to go and convene and coalesce around this work as we move forward in the future would be a really helpful thing, which is why this recommendation was put in there. And I'll also say this is another area that I think the Bar Foundation feels that we can help play a role in convening this. A lot of our civic education programs are statewide. One of the ones, for example, the Civic Health Index, which was the genesis of this group, we do that every other year, and this seems like this sort of a group seems like a great place to embed that. And I'll give a shout out to General Zeller and former Chief Justice Shepard, who are on this, along with Lee Hamilton, Congressman Lee Hamilton, who have been our co-chairs of that effort for many, many years. But this seems like an opportunity to be able to more formalize that moving forward, and also bring together discussion, policy, proposals, et cetera, around civic education. So it's not something that sort of pops up onto the radar once in a while. It's something that's a sustained effort. And so creating this group is one of the recommendations that we proposed for consideration. So I will pause there and see if anybody would like to discuss any of those or this one in particular before we move on to phase 2.
You're fine with questions from the chat, so if anybody would like to unmute or...
All right. Well, again, you'll have more opportunities, but we will press on to phase 2. So again, the timeline on this is proposed generally 2024 to 2026, and you'll see why these are sort of longer term recommendations. And we'll go through the first one. And some of these, you know, it gets a little bit of, there's a lot of different perspectives on some of these things, obviously. This first one, pre-service teacher content. One of the things, and Tim, do we have data points after this? I can't remember.
Yes, there's at least 1 or 2 slides or data.
So I'll go through this and then hit the data points, and then I'll pause. So this recommendation: establish civics, political science course requirements for pre-service teachers to obtain licensure and a degree. There is a wide range of current requirements for college students who are pursuing a degree and want to be teachers, and as it relates to civics and political science and those sorts of things. Obviously it depends on what you want to teach and those sorts of things, but there are some requirements across the board, and it ranges quite dramatically. And if you want to click to the next slide, Tim, some of the data that we pulled in, again, there was a high level of interest in teaching this particular topic. Again, middle school and high school, I think they're able to teach the topic because they can specialize more than elementary. And then the next slide. And all the training I need for civics, again, I think there is, and again, at middle and elementary school levels, there's a need and a desire to have more of a baseline of knowledge on some of these civics concepts. And obviously professional development can be there as a continuing effort to sort of address those needs. But for teachers coming through the training system, to be able to give them a baseline of civics and political science information and knowledge at their collegiate level, so that they're prepared and capable of moving forward, seemed like something to address this particular area. So that was where some of this came from. I know there are a lot of perspectives on this, and there's a lot of perspectives on anything that could be seen as a mandate or something that should be incorporated that way. But let me pause there, and I know there are educators and administrators and people much smarter than I on this particular topic. If you would like to weigh in on any of this, I would be happy to hear your perspectives.
I think this would help them pass their licensure exams better as well. I mean, they have to take a range of history courses, but there's in a lot of IU campuses, there's a range of social science courses that they can take. and political science may or may not be one of them, but political science knowledge is something that's generally on their licensure exam for elementary teachers. So I'm in support of this. I don't think 18 credit hours of it would work, but I would love it personally as a civics enthusiast. But I think a 3 credit hour course would be lovely.
Yeah, that's given the range perspective. I think that was Purdue that had the upper end range, and there were some that didn't have any. So there's a wide spectrum depending on, you know, where you were going. Any other thoughts? All right. Nothing in the chat, Joseph? I will presume. Okay.
Yeah, no, there's not.
Okay.
Sorry, my mic was muted.
That's okay. So next, standards. Oh, yes.
I was just going to jump in for those who don't know. Dr. Stephanie Serriere she'll have to correct me, but she is the pre-service teacher coordinator and whatever is the right word for the one who teaches the pre-service teachers at IUPU Columbus, and all of her research is in elementary civics. So she is on the ground teaching those students who are going out. So she's a great advocate to have someone in elementary at the development level advocating for her students as they enter the classroom to be teaching more civics. Just so everybody knew who she was.
Yes, thank you, and we appreciate your perspective on this, especially in your area of expertise, and joining us. Thank you. So the next section deal with standards revisions. And this is one, again, that we've put in the phase 2 for the primary reason that it has a timetable associated with it, which will fall into that phase 2 timeline in its natural progression. So with that, the specific recommendations that have so far come forward are, when it is time to review social studies civics standards, that the state standards be crafted and revised with college, career, civic life, C3 framework as the basis, with consultation of civic learning experts and advocates. And I know a lot of that happens already to a certain extent, and Janet and other people who have been part of this process will know a lot more than I will about that. But the idea also, you know, our world has changed probably even the short period of time since the last standards were put into place. So digital citizenship, digital content, digital delivery of education could potentially be incorporated into that process. I think from, you know, levels of implementation, I don't know how realistic it is to sort of move that up, or if it's fairly well established as a timeline. But the idea of, you know, using some of these guides that have come out incorporated into the standards is what we're looking at with that particular recommendation. And then the second one, increase civic course requirements at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And I am certain that, you know, with things being sort of a zero-sum game in this, as far as the timeline to teach various things, if you add more of one, you potentially would be taking away from something else, and although there's the cross-curricular sort of integration opportunities as well. But if you want to increase civic education, that's one way to do it very literally, is increase the specific courses required. And so there may be opportunities to do that through middle, high school, and specifically also at elementary, ranging from a full year of high school civics government course as opposed to a semester, and some things like that. So is that it for this one, Tim? For these recommendations?
Got at least a chart or two afterwards as well.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that then. Okay, so again, this gets back to some of the points we've seen before. How frequently is civics taught in your classroom? More often than not, and again, these are elementary, where they have to teach everything all kind of at the same time. It's pretty low as far as the frequency, and then when it is taught, on the next slide, I believe, it's not a lot of time devoted to it because of all the other things. So were there any more slides on that, Tim? But I think that was it.
That's it there.
Okay, so if you go back to the recommendation, the idea of increasing the amount of civics taught through specific course requirements was the second one, and then the standards was the first one. So let me pause there and see if there are any comments or questions from any of the members.
We have what appears to be a comment. I teach my elementary social studies course through the C3 framework, and there's a disconnect right now with the Indiana DOE standards on that. New York DOE does a nice job with the C3 framework. Therein lies the answer of how to integrate well to inquiry as modeled by the C3 framework from Stephanie Serrier, we just heard from.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I think that's what this recommendation is trying to get at, is to integrate those better into the standards, at least the first recommendation there. Anything else?
Oh, one just came in from Dr. Osborne. We definitely need to make sure we incorporate C3 framework into our recommendations. This is what NCSS promotes as how to teach SS, social studies.
Yeah, I think there's a growing consensus about that, which is, again, the focus of this particular recommendation. Anybody else, either a written comment or would like to make an unmuted oral comment during this part? Feel free.
One just came in before you move on. Representative Pfaff, is the DOE responsible for making this decision?
I will defer to others, but I believe that it is, as far as the standards go.
You are correct.
Sorry, he responds yes and says, I hope so.
Yes. So yeah, that's and the other thing, by the way, one of the things I'll mention, we wanted to get through this meeting first, but from these recommendations, one of the things that we're going to be looking at doing is potentially adding maybe what we call a fourth column with implementation. Not levels of implementation, but sort of who is responsible for doing this. Is it a legislative change? Is it a policy change at the DOE? Is it something else? And so for each of these recommendations that we end up with, I think we are going to be addressing that in the next phase as we're putting this together, so we have a better idea to that particular point. If we want to do something and we want this recommendation to take effect, who is it that will help us do that? So we'll have our own little sort of civics lesson embedded in this process to find out who the responsible agency is for enacting some of these things. Did somebody mention? Yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah. Two more comments. Well, first off, thank you, Dr. Watson, for the answer to the question of the DOE being responsible. And then we have Dr. Osborne saying DOE has teacher groups to work on standards revisions, then has public comment, and I believe sends to General Assembly. I was on the Indiana Studies Standard Committee, and Stephanie responded with a thumbs up.
Great. So yeah, standards revision, a longer term, at least by our initial breakout, given the time frame that's already embedded in it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one, assessment and accountability. Again, there are many views and perspectives on a lot of these things, including this one certainly, but the general recommendation as proposed is that Indiana should ensure that authentic assessments are utilized to address the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that make up a comprehensive preparation for civic life. So the idea is, if you're going to be able to have assessments and accountability, look at authentic assessments as a way to incorporate some of that. And we have heard some examples of those in the last task force meeting. And so that's what this recommendation is particularly designed to look at. The levels of implementation, there's a variety. Again, we talked about a must, must pass, must be administered, shall be encouraged. There's different ways to incorporate these assessments and accountability that policymakers can further refine. But the idea around this particular recommendation is create authentic assessments and try to use those as much as possible when you are administering assessments and accountability for the content. So I don't believe there are any additional slides with that one, Tim.
Correct.
Okay, so let me pause there and see if anybody has any thoughts on this particular piece.
We had a comment come in from Dr. Osborne related to the previous piece that civics and government is one of the 5 strands in the Indiana study standards. But as of this assessment and accountability, there are no questions from the chat so far.
Okay. You're all making it very easy for us. Thank you. But you shouldn't take that as not wanting to weigh in. We do want you to weigh in if you have some thoughts, by all means. Okay, next. So another area that has come up is the idea of a civics project for graduation. Again, is the R word, requirement. But the idea of having students complete some kind of civics project, and there are two. The first recommendation deals with 5th and 8th grades. The second one deals more with the high school and incorporating it into the graduation pathways that's currently I guess it's going to be implemented in the near future. So the first one, focusing on 5th and 8th grades, there's a lot of different ways to do this. Some of them could incorporate other aspects that we've already talked about from recommendations. But the idea of, again, trying to make this real to students and show things as much as possible in real world scenarios and simulations, things like that. And if you have a specific project that they can be a part of, Project Citizen is a good one I'm familiar with, and there are many others out there that really the students take ownership of it and they produce their results and they come through the process that way. So that's what this particular recommendation is about, and infusing that in the 5th and 8th grades primarily. The second one, link the civics project with graduation requirement with the employability skills component, project-based, service-based, and work-based learning experience of the graduation pathways requirements set for 2023. Again, I will, Dr. Hammack, I don't want to put you on the spot, but of course I will now that I've said your name. You had some really good feedback and thoughts along this at the policy committee level. I don't know if you want to share any of that with the rest of the group or not.
Sure. We were having the conversation in our policy group that any way that we could take current structures and then fold in advancing civics education to kind of previously existing structures would be a way to efficiently go about deploying a little bit more intention with this work. So the graduation pathway requirements are established in an established framework currently, and we thought that a way to give civics education another lift would be to add this civics project to the employability skills bucket for graduation pathways. It would be kind of a checking of the box for that particular bucket, and then would really elevate civics education in the same way.
Thank you. So let me pause there and see if there are any additional questions, comments, feedback, etc.
A couple just came in. Dr. Serriere saying, I love the civic action project idea. And then Amy Dudas said, more of a practical question. What happens to students who relocate to the state after 8th grade?
That is a good question. Dr. Hammack, I saw you unmute, so I'll call you again.
No, we've had that question come up in just some other areas of testing, or that tends to be an issue when you're kind of thinking about grade level specific requirements for graduation. Typically, that just would be waived if you aren't a participant. If you aren't a resident of the state when whatever that benchmark is delivered, then that's typically something that's waived until you get to high school, and then that's where some of those specific requirements still have to be deployed.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? Okay, we'll move on to the next one.
Let's say just a data slide or two, kind of looking back at the last issue.
Great, thank you, Tim. Yeah, these are just some of the elements that who is using simulations so far, and you can see that many are, but again, over half are, but primarily at the middle and high school level, and so. And even there's enough that aren't, that it would be something that could be added to the curriculum to improve. And again, students required to conduct service learning in any of your classes or graduation requirement. The majority is no. So this would be a new thing that would hopefully add to the civic education experience at all levels.
And that completes the recommendations parts of the presentation, Chuck.
Wow, okay. Let's see. Let me pause there, see if there are any other comments, questions, etc.
Just a, Dr. Serrier said, as a reference for the former, the lived civics approach is a well-founded approach to meet students at their interests, and she included a link that I suggest you check out.
Great, thank you. So what just as a general, I'll say a few sort of things to sort of give us some context, and then if you have additional thoughts, comments, etc., please feel free to chime in. But what our plan is going forward, if you have additional feedback that you'd like to provide after the meeting, we would love to hear it. And I know there are a few people who couldn't be on the meeting today that have contacted me, and we're anxious to hear their feedback about these recommendations. You know, good, bad, otherwise, suggestions, etc. We're happy to hear them and to take them and incorporate them. But I guess the takeaway is do it fairly quickly, because we will be moving towards the drafting phase in order to make sure we have the report drafted, put together, and with enough time for you all to review it prior to the next task force meeting, which will be the last task force meeting scheduled in late October. And so we'd love to hear your thoughts, gather some more information. If short of hearing, you know, any major concerns, otherwise these will probably be the form of the recommendations that will be crafted into the final report. The idea for the report is still sort of a bit under development, but we'll probably have a material at the end, an appendix or something with the data, so people can see some of that we've gathered, and for the benefit of everybody who wants to see that, we'll have that available. We're also going to probably separate it into and keep the same phase 1, phase 2 dynamic as far as the overall framework. Again, pending discussions, feedback from folks who on that issue, and we'll have the recommendations broken out generally, as you've seen, with some more narrative about each of them. And then the idea, and you'll be hearing more about this as we go forward, the public release of the report, we're looking for early November. And as you may know, there's some national things happening in early November, like an election. So we're probably going to be focused on post-election, but shortly thereafter. I think anything pre-election will probably be difficult to get traction from the media, et cetera. So we're focused on shortly after that, somewhere maybe around Organization Day or thereabouts for the legislature, and to get some attention that way. And then going into the new year, we will be looking for especially folks who've been involved in this process, i.e. all of you and others, to help participate and spotlight those recommendations and seeing what we can get accomplished and moving forward that way. Let's see. So I guess if you have additional feedback or comments, please contact me or Joseph or Tim within the next week would be ideal, in order to be on the record with some of that, and that would be helpful. So let me pause here to see if there are any other comments, questions, feedback at this point about the recommendations, the data, and anything else that you'd like to put out there for the group. Justice Shepard.
I was going to mention that the way in which the recommendations are laid out is appropriate to this to the field, which is highly organized and regulated and administered. But we'd hope to get help, support, and interest from people who don't even know there are standards. And or they know there are standards, but they don't know the word, they don't know the lingo. And maybe what I'm talking about is what the press release should look like. But it did seem to me, there were a couple there when I read them, and my reaction was, I'm not sure what that means. Now,
Right.
Listening to you talk about it, I finally got when, where, and why it might apply. But I think you need, I'd recommend giving some thought to either where in the report or where close by people whose principal vocation is running a bank or working in local government, and would be able to pick up on that and say, oh, well, here are 4 or 5 ideas described in ways that I can immediately grasp. And I might want to call my school board member or my representative or senator and say, this is really good stuff, because I've now sort of got a little bit of it. So enough said.
Excellent point. And I think from that perspective, at least this presentation, I think with 56 slides, we were a little bit concerned that we, presenting it in a concise way, we lost some of the nuance, and which was hoped to be part of the discussion. But I think your point is a good one, and there may be ways that we can specifically say, if you are somebody who's interested in advancing this, a private business or something else, we might be able to make specific examples and concrete steps that they can take within the report itself, and how that's designed. So I appreciate that, and we will try to make sure that we focus on the practical, what this translates to in the layman's terms as well within the report. And certainly the press release, which I'm sure will be concise and, competing with everything else going on, but be able to hopefully communicate that quickly and obviously to people what it is that we're doing and what the recommendations are. Thank you. Any other thoughts on content, format, etc.? All right. Seeing no others, again, feel free to communicate and send your thoughts our way during the next week or so. And again, I think as we move forward, we'll be circulating information for you all to get reactions to, and along those lines, get it out to you for your reaction and input at the near the end, but with plenty of time to do that. So hopefully this will be a report that, as we said, moves the needle on some of these things. So with that, I'm sure nobody will be opposed to, 37 extra minutes in your day to do what you want to do. And I thank you all for again, your support in this effort, and look forward to seeing you at the next and last meeting, if not before. Thank you all.